So thank you all for joining us for the How to Use Your Committee Member and Advisor for Feedback workshop. Joining us today are Drs. James Navalta, Jana Dufek, and Raphael Oganessian. They will be answering your questions about how to use your committee members and advisor for feedback. I'm going to hand it over to them first for introductions, and then we're going to begin taking questions. So, Dr. Navalta, would you like to start us off?
Yes, hi. Let's see. Introduction. I'm in the Kinesiology and Nutrition Sciences department. I've been here for about 9 years, and I've been the grad coordinator for the Masters in Kinesiology program for, I think, 2 or 3 years.
Dr. Dufek?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Janet Dufek. I'm the Associate Dean in the School of Integrated Health Sciences, and I'm a professor of biomechanics in the Department of Kinesiology and Nutrition Sciences. I also serve as the program director for the Interdisciplinary Health Sciences PhD program, and I'm a member of the Executive Committee of the Graduate College. I'd like to welcome you to this workshop, and I'm glad to see you're here. This is an interesting, and I hope this is an interesting and informative session for everyone.
Thank you. Dr. Oganessian?
Hi, everyone. My name is Raphael Oganessian. I'm the program manager at the Office of Undergraduate Research. I am a recent PhD graduate in summer of 2019 from the Department of Political Science. And I completed all my higher education coursework and degree work at UNLV. So I look forward to a lively discussion about this topic.
Great, thank you all. So to start us off, what is the role of committee members, advisors, and the student when it comes to feedback? So specifically, what is the role for the chair or co-chairs and for committee members in general?
I'll start, and then others can add. The chair or co-chair is really the person responsible to guide the student and to mentor the student to progress appropriately and to achieve the final end game. They are the problem solver. They are the leader of the gang, of the troop, and they are there also to listen to the challenges that student may have. Co-chairs, if we have co-chairs, same sort of thing. It's a shared collaboration. And I think, Nev, did you ask also what is the role of the student?
Yes.
When it comes to feedback, yeah. The role there is to, first of all, be amenable to input. Your mentor, your chair is providing you input to produce a better product. So please try not to be defensive, listen, ask questions. And there are many other things I could say, but I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues and let them add their perspectives.
I'll go ahead and jump in, and it's really speaking to the nature of the feedback. Like Dr. Dufek said, it's not to make you jump through hoops or anything like that. It's really to improve the nature of the product. And I guess you can rely on your committee, the years of experience that they have to know what makes a good product. And, in some cases, the feedback is, the nature of the feedback is such that you need to make these changes. And then in other cases, the nature is more like it's preferential. So it's, you can decide whether or not you want to incorporate it or not, and they'll leave that up to you. But they will communicate, I think, the nature.
So I guess from the former student point of view, I think it's important for graduate students to understand sort of this division of labor that exists within a committee, right? Where you have your chairs or co-chairs, and then you have your other committee members who, some departments are called readers, right, or considered readers. And it's important that you sort of take your cues from the chairs or the co-chairs, right? I've seen committee members, or I've seen committees where there were disagreements between, let's say, the reader or readers and the chair or co-chairs, and it was this communication network existed through the student. The student is essentially still the mentee, and the chair is the mentor. The chair has, they all sign off your dissertation, but the chair has the symbolic role that exists. And in every setting, a lot of the readers understand that, it's ultimately it's the chair's decision, which way does a comment or two go. So just to point out that it's important for you to have a good relationship with the chair, open channels of communication, right? The last thing the chair wants to see is, they email you comments and hear back from you like a month later, right? Communication is very, 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 I cannot stress that enough for a completed dissertation. You need to maintain lively and direct communication with your chair.
I'd just like to add one more thing relative to the communication piece. And, this is a two-way communication channel. So as students, and I tell my students this all the time, if they ask me a question and they don't hear from me in a day or two, faculty are busy, students are busy. Sometimes we all know how electronic communication can sometimes get buried. Don't be afraid to approach your committee once again with the same question. Say, hey, I hope hope things are going okay. Perhaps you missed this message? Don't be afraid to do that, because we as faculty are not at all offended by that. We're human. We miss things, and sometimes we're trying to multitask when we shouldn't be. So keep that in mind as well. And I couldn't agree more with Dr. O that it's a two-way thing and communication's key.
And I'll just jump in there as well. So along with the following up, it might be appropriate to suggest a deadline. If you don't give a deadline, then your faculty might not know the urgency of the feedback that you're seeking. So it might be good to say, if you could get me your feedback within a week or something, that would probably be good. A reasonable deadline, I should say.
Thank you. So you all mentioned following up with your committee if maybe they got lost in the email or they just were busy. But from your own experience, what's the best way for graduate students to handle if a mentor or advisor and committee members, they're not fulfilling their roles or responsibilities when it comes to providing feedback? And if you've already followed up, what are some next steps that you will be able to take?
I can start with that one. I think it's very important for students to select their committee members, right? Not based on this need to include this larger group of professors because they got along with them, right? And also keep in mind this theory of veto players, right? Each one of your committee member is a veto player, and the larger the amount of veto players in an organization, the less likely you're going to come to a consensus. So it's important for you to have committee members that will provide something of substance to your dissertation, right? It's rather than to simply have them in your committee because you took 3-4 courses with them and enjoy them as a faculty member. That being said, if a committee member is not fulfilling their duties, I would imagine being the professional, that committee member would simply say that they want to, no longer be part of the dissertation committee. If the student doesn't see that, I think a natural thing to do would be to talk to their chair, right? Maybe talk to that committee member first, just to make sure that you're sort of given what you think is they're not providing the feedback that they need to. Talk to that committee member if you have that relationship. Ultimately, you can go to your chair and talk to them about that fact that the committee member is not fulfilling their requirements or fulfilling what you think they should be fulfilling in terms of maybe they're not paying attention to the reviews of each chapter, or they're not providing substantive feedback. I mean, at the end of the day, to me, that relationship with the chair is one of the most important things in a dissertation committee.
So lots of things there, but this is really kind of a loaded question. So if we're talking about a committee member who is not fulfilling their obligation, that's it, right, Nev? That was the question. So it really depends what role that committee member is filling. If we start at the top and we say it's a chair, then it's an ugly situation because you don't really have an ally to have a conversation with. Raphael's right. Your next appropriate step is to speak with the department chair in that case. If it's a committee member, then you as a student, as you've developed this relationship with your mentor, talk to that person and see if you're aligned with perspectives. It may be that your perception as a student is very different than your mentor's perception as a faculty member. So make sure you're on the same page as well. And the other thing to keep in mind here is that everyone involved in this process is a human being. And although we're talking about this objective of completing a dissertation or a thesis, all the rest of us have all of these other things going on in our lives, right? So it may be that your mentor knows something that's going on. There's been some catastrophe in this faculty member's life, something that they're trying to shield from the student, or that it's not appropriate to mix. And your mentor may know that and may be able to just say, well, there's some things going on. I'm not at liberty to discuss them. Let's give Professor XY, a week or a month or some time to try to regroup. So there can be lots of things that can go on there. The other thing to do is to talk to your peers or your colleagues, your student peers, relative to the perception that you have and what their experience may be relative to, and I believe Raphael kind of alluded to this, are your perceptions aligned appropriately? Are they exaggerated? Are you expecting your faculty members to walk on water when in fact, the water's not frozen? So there are all kinds of things here, but appropriate chains of command likely would be, your mentor first, your department chair, as it was suggested, or there may be a committee of faculty that can review. You really want to satisfy this or solve this problem internally and try to avoid, if possible, the graduate college. There is a grievance process for students. However, I'd like to suggest that we view this as a last chance or a last choice option. But keep in mind, it does exist.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, it's understanding what the roles of your committee members are. Definitely your chair is going to be the person that you're going to speak with and communicate with most often. They'll take the lion's share of that. Your other committee members, your departmental members will be involved at certain points along the way. And then also the graduate college representative is not necessarily, it doesn't have to be content expert. They're on the committee to make sure that the policies are being kind of followed as you go along. But yeah, I would also recommend using your chair as an ally in communicating and kind of figuring out what is going on if you have a committee member that you don't feel is meeting their responsibilities.
Thank you. How would you suggest approaching the discussion of removing someone from your committee that no longer feels like an appropriate fit?
If no one else wants to start, I'll start. Dr. Navalta touched upon something that is important to assure we all understand in the context of this question. Faculty members, committee members, and I think this may come up later down the list here, but your committee members serve different roles and they have different responsibilities. We've already discussed the role and the responsibility of the chair and co-chair. As Dr. Navalta suggested, committee members have various alternative roles. They likely have some content expertise, and that is where they might be best used. And you may not be far enough in your process where their expertise is required yet. But the other important person on your committee is, in fact, your graduate college representative. That person is the watchdog, the graduate college watchdog. He or she is protecting you as a student and the university as an entity. So assuring quality, but yet assuring there is no lack of, or that there exists no student abuse. So if in fact that graduate college representative who may not know the dynamics of people on the committee, may never have worked with them in an academic sense in the past, may be able to view something like this in a more objective sense. That may be the best person for you to talk with first if you feel, well, obviously your chair, but if you feel there is a lack of support or a lack of duty obligation fulfillment by a committee member. Again, I could say a lot more, but let me turn it over to my colleagues.
Yeah, it's deciding to remove somebody from your committee. It's a difficult conversation to have sometimes, and I personally would kind of approach it head on. Go to the committee member, explain to them, and I think if you are transparent in that, there won't be any kind of hard feelings or anything. And in a lot of cases, it's probably going to be there's going to be a certain amount of understanding and I think agreement to that.
I would parallel with the previous speakers and just simply say that, yeah, I mean, unfortunately or fortunately, I never had to deal with this. During my master's thesis committee, one of my members who realized that my thesis was going in a different direction removed themselves and actually said, hey, instead of me, there's this faculty that this should be on your committee, since now I've sort of seen the overview of your thesis. I'm not as good of a reader as this person is. So they actually volunteered to remove themselves and then oriented me toward another faculty member who, interestingly enough, became my co-chair in my dissertation committee, right? So, at the end, it all worked out.
So one other person to involve in these conversations, and unlike Dr. O, I have been involved in these conversations, maybe your graduate coordinator, as a person who understands the rules and the program requirements and all of those types of things, and likely knows the faculty well as well. So you do always have the department chair, but your graduate coordinator is another person to add to the mix.
Great, thank you. So looking at it from your point of view as either the advisor or the committee chair, what are your expectations for mentees when it comes to feedback you have provided, and how do you handle when these expectations are not being met from your student?
Of course, it never happens to start with, right? No. I think this is a point that Dr. Navalta raised earlier. Timelines, deadlines are good to set out so that students know what their expectations are. If they're not meeting those expectations, it's time to have that serious discussion about what the ramifications of that might mean. And they may end up to be extension of degree plan, which ultimately can be a financial burden on the student. It may be something relative to progression of their career, the ability or the inability to accept a job offer or something like that. So understanding what the ramifications of not meeting the or not responding to the feedback appropriately is the first point there. The second point is, from a student's perspective, if you can't meet a deadline and you know you can't meet a deadline, have the conversation. There's nothing worse from my perspective of being a mentor of having a student falsely promise a product and then continue to falsely promise that product. We understand that students, as I said earlier, have lives and have challenges and have other things going on. And we know that workloads are sinusoidal, right? That exists for all of us. So some degree of leniency, but some level of expectation and professionalism as well.
And I'll just add to that, as a mentor, I understand that all of my students are different. They're in different places in their career, have different kind of backgrounds and what they bring. So the way that they respond to feedback is also going to be different. And kind of the way that I approach it with my mentees is that when we set a deadline, we do it collaboratively. So it's not me mandating saying, okay, by next week you're going to have this. I talk with them and say, do you think you can do this by next week? And if not, then let's set a realistic deadline. So it's having that conversation, I think, and it's you knowing your mentor and your mentor also knowing you.
Thank you. So our next question is more geared towards when you're beginning to put your committee together. So if your department lacks an expert in your dissertation topic, do you recommend bringing in an outside member, so like outside of UNLV, to your committee?
I think it depends upon your degree plan, I think. Master's level, probably not as much a requirement or a necessity. Dissertations now in our current age are becoming very, very specific, very, very content specific. I see Dr. O, yes. He's the closest to this. And, faculty at UNLV are here because of their expertise, but yet there typically are not 17 people with the same expertise, right? We're not going to find that. There may be that person nationally that is the leader in that field, and there certainly is nothing wrong with doing that. You have to pay attention to the rules and regs in your program. This may require you to expand the number of people on your committee. Go ahead, Dr. Raphael. I can tell you've got a lot to say about this.
Yeah, so in this case, I actually had somebody come in from the outside of my committee. So I study voter behavior and election forecasting. And in the Department of Political Science, we have several individuals that study comparative politics, democratization, and so on. But when I was finishing, I really saw myself in the faculty route. And given how competitive the job market is in political science and overall, I felt the need that I needed somebody, sort of a national heavyweight, to sign off on my dissertation. And so I just reached out. This was a multi-year process where this individual was actually involved in my field work in the post-Soviet space. So I filled out the paperwork. I mean, luckily at UNLV, it's not as difficult. You simply need them to fill out a paperwork and submit their CV. And I guess they get grad faculty status or something like that, and then they can join the committee, if I'm not mistaken. The one thing I will say is it becomes very tricky because now you have your chair, who's the head of your committee, but you're also bringing in a national expert who's now, like I said, in my case, that was her topic, right? Economic voting in Eastern Europe. I mean, her dissertation, her career was based off of that, right? So luckily, they had a previous relationship and, it all worked out at the end. But something that you need to note is, especially if you bring somebody from the outside that is an expert in your topic, is that relationship that they need to have with your chair, right? Luckily, in my case, the chair still commanded, or my co-chair still commanded, the direction of the dissertation. So just to keep that in mind. But that's something that I did, and it was a great experience.
I guess the only other thing that I would add to that is to take into consideration meeting times. If you're going across multiple time zones, might be a little more difficult to arrange if you're adding somebody from the outside that's not, in our time zone.
Thank you. So still on the topic of forming your committee, some students don't completely understand the role the graduate college committee member plays. How should a student fully embed this outside committee member in the committee and the overall process to make sure they get that benefit from that?
It's all start because I started with that a little bit earlier. This is really, as I said, this person has the role of representing the graduate college and the university and protecting the student. They have to ensure that all policies and procedures are followed, so they have to know all the policies and procedures. Just as a point of reference, it may not be wise to choose a brand new UNLV faculty member to serve in this role because they may not and likely do not know all of the graduate school policies and procedures. As Dr. Navalta alluded to earlier, there's no need for them to have any specific content expertise. If they do, great, but that's not a requirement at all. So oftentimes that person is identified through a conversation with your chair. Faculty members at UNLV serve various roles. Obviously, we instruct courses, we conduct our research, but we also provide service across campus. And we meet and interact with colleagues across different academic units. And we develop relationships with those individuals as well. And there may be conversations and there may be an opportunity for the faculty across those various academic disciplines to sit on a committee together and actually provide the expertise that's necessary. So that's what I'll say for now.
I'll jump in and just add a little bit, as far as embedding them into the process. I don't really treat the grad college rep any different than any other of the committee. When documents are being sent out, it's sent out to the entire committee. And when we're setting up a time to meet, that time is set up with everybody in the committee. So yeah, the embedding portion is you're just treating the grad college rep just like everybody else on your committee.
The one thing I would note on this topic, I guess from a student's point of view, and I've seen this happen in a previous defense, is when you have somebody who's a grad college rep is obviously from outside of your department. And if your dissertation is obviously it's a narrow topic and it's very specifically tailored to your discipline. And it's very important for you to have that communication with the outside rep, especially in your theoretical framework and how you conceptualize terms. Because let's say, for example, the way we conceptualize democratization or how we categorize some countries may be different in political science than it is different in sociology, right? And it's very important because a lot of the liberal arts disciplines, have some cross-disciplinary terms that they then use differently or they conceptualize differently. So it's very important to point that out in order to avoid further confusion or some confusion when it comes time to interacting with your outside member.
Thank you. So going back to that previous question about asking an expert outside of UNLV, this question is specific for Dr. Oganessian. How did you recruit this person to your committee? Was it professional conference networking, an email? What does that process look like?
I mean, I'd rather be blunt, right? So when I first got into the graduate program, I went to my first conference, and what I saw was this. It was a very large conference. It was the Midwest Political Science Association conference, and what I saw was a large network of graduate students trying to, entertain faculty, trying to get noticed. And then I quickly realized, this is I'm in this atmosphere where you sort of need to expand your network. You need others, you need experts to notice your research, right? And hence began this process of going to conferences. My first year, I think I went to 4 conferences, presented different papers in each, right? The goal was to maximize my network outreach. And it was done strategically based on that first conference, right? Based on the fact that I understood that these conferences were as much about presenting your research as it is about, for graduate students, expanding your scope, your academic scope, your academic network. And so I began to interact with different experts in my field. So I study how economics impacts elections and how we can forecast elections before they actually occur, or electoral results. And so what I did is I started going to every single panel on elections, right? which then turned to, after the panel, professor will usually say, hey, I'm so-and-so, thank you for your talk. Just ask simple questions, followed by a thank you email, right? Followed by, do you mind looking at my work, right? You slowly build this relationship. And, over time, that relationship can translate to lunch at another conference, right? Or grab a coffee with this professor, right? And this was a multi-year relationship. Specifically with this individual, it took me about 2 years for me to do the formal ask and say, hey, I'm forming a committee, would you mind serving, right? So these relationships are not built within a conference or two. This was a multi-year relationship. So with regard to networking, I cannot stress enough how networking is important to a conference, right? Me personally, I say one of the least effective things you can do to a conference is simply go to your panel and then go back to your hotel room as a graduate student, or, go sightseeing, right? You're there to get noticed and to network with other people, to reach out to them. Because and I'll conclude with this, when it comes time for a job, right, especially in the academic market, you want your fellow colleagues or even your mentors throughout the country email you saying, hey, there's an opening here, you should apply, right? You want that relationship to be there.
Thank you.
I think those are great comments. I do have some other experiences that I can share, if that's okay now.
Of course.
So there are different models as well. One of my current doctoral students actually worked with a content expert as an undergrad in her research lab. And we decided to reach out to her as a content expert on his dissertation. So that was a previous relationship that my student had with a faculty member at a different institution. Now, there have been other faculty or other students in our unit who have chosen different approaches. And they tie somewhat to what Dr. O was talking about, but it's that content expert that the students saw from the literature. So had not developed that personal relationship, but had a professional understanding of what that person could bring to the table, and then made that ask. Others have actually worked with the outside person in a clinical setting or in a job. And although that person, and this is more so locally, although that person was not a UNLV faculty member, they were content area expertise. The student knew them from a different environment and invited them to stay on. So there are lots of different ways to go about this. It depends at what level you know or need to know or have known or have worked to get to know that content expert. So I hope that's helpful along with what Dr. O shared with us.
Great, thank you. So our next question that just came in is, what are one down a little. What are some ways to overcome feeling like a pest to your committee? As a first-generation student, I feel lost on the thesis process, but I'm nervous I'm being too needy with my committee chair about questions about what to do next.
As a first-generation faculty member, I feel your pain. I don't think that's something that you're as you get to know your mentor, you probably have that conversation. I don't know how to do this. I don't have a model. Let me know if I'm bothering you too much. Just be open about it. And if your mentor thinks that you are becoming too trivial, he or she will let you know in a kind and polite way. They might say, well, okay, let's talk about 2 or 3 of these points, and let's save the others for you to do some back work on. That may be one way to go about that. But keep in mind, the UNLV is an institution of access. We all know about our diversity status nationally, and we embrace diversity, equity, inclusion, and there is no stupid question.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there as well. I think it's something that you'll kind of naturally fall into. At least I've done that with my students. Some need to meet a little more often, and some don't. And it's just kind of depends on the student. It's something that I think the more that you get to know your advisor, the more comfortable that you'll get to be. And in my experience, all the faculty here at UNLV are more than willing to meet and help students.
So I have a story to share that's appropriate to answer this question, and I'll keep it brief. My mentor talked about his experiences when he was earning his degree and how he would approach a particular faculty. He said, I would always go with my main question or questions, but I would have a lead-in question that was trivial. So if in fact the response that I got to that trivial question, I could sense that the faculty member was in a bad mood or didn't have time or whatever, that's it, I'd stop. I'd stop with my one lead-in question, say thank you very much, and I'd make another appointment. So that's a real human, this is the way things go. We all have bad days, way to address that as well. Then, if that first question is answered appropriately and you can sense there's going to be a good conversation, then run with the real important things. I can't say I've done that. I've seen my mentor's done that and shared that approach.
Thank you. So we have a student asking, I would like to review feedback in person because English is my second language. How realistic is this?
I'm assuming that question is couched in the COVID-19 situation.
Well,
go ahead.
Maybe if during COVID, it would be like a one-on-one Zoom meeting.
Right. Or, it could be, what I'm hearing is that, the electronic communication form is not the best for the student. We can still meet with individuals, socially distanced. We will have to wear masks. As the weather cools, we can be outside. That also minimizes the risk. So it's not totally unrealistic. So I guess that's the answer to the question that I have.
And I found, with the video conferencing capabilities, it's made it a lot more likely that instead of me kind of trying to answer in an email, I'll say, hey, let's just hop on and we'll talk. It's not face to face, but it's virtually. And I think a lot of the students that I've talked with have liked that opportunity as well.
Thank you. So sometimes we may get some conflicting feedback from our committee members. What suggestions do you have for navigating this conflicting feedback between our advisor and committee members?
That is an awesomely great question, and it is a very challenging situation. First thing that the faculty, the chair has the responsibility to do is at one point to isolate the student to assure that there is no emotional shouting match between the faculty members, that people do not get too defensive about their positions. So I think that's the first piece. The second piece is then to have, well, what I would recommend is to have student faculty one-on-one conversations about the differences of opinions and based upon, and then try to come to resolve from that point. It's probably one of the reasons why thesis and dissertation committees are greater than N equals 2 faculty members.
And I would add, I think, and we've talked about this kind of as a theme throughout, just being, having good communication, being transparent. And I think it's fine to go to your advisor and say, I don't know how to handle this. Can you help me? Or to go to the other person on your committee that has some conflict and say, I don't know what to do here. What do you suggest? To have them help you out with the answers to that.
So as a former student, actually, during my defense, I received conflicting feedback. Um, and it was specifically how certain group of countries were categorized. And it essentially what it turned out to be that it was the outside person, and in that person's discipline, this group of countries were included in, let's say, a pool of study, but not in our discipline. So um, unfortunately, this was not made apparent during the back and forth we had, and it came out during the defense. Um, Obviously, the defense is not the proper place to engage in, well, no, this is how we do things here, right? So the comment was duly noted, but then we had a separate meeting between me, the chair, and then the outside person, and to simply discuss, what was going on, and what was just a quick discussion of, hey, in your discipline, this is the norm, but in this, in our discipline, you know, this is how we do it. And I believe I counted it in like a footnote or something, just, to get that outside person's approval, just to disclose that aspect.
Thank you. So can you speak a little about if there are pros and cons to having co-chairs?
I guess I can start. So I've had co-chairs. So in my master's, I had one chair, and then in my dissertation committee, I had co-chairs. Luckily, when I formed the committee, when I formed the co-chairs, one of my co-chairs in our one-on-one setting said, look, since this topic is more aligned with your other co-chair, he will be taking a back seat to the advice of this co-chair, right? He understood that there can be two people behind the wheel of a vehicle driving it at the same time. So obviously run everything by him still, but he made it very clear that in areas where they disagreed, where co-chair A and co-chair B disagreed, co-chair A told me to go with co-chair B's suggestions, that he would be okay with it. And obviously he would know that they disagreed because we were always emailing back and forth chapters, and I was including both co-chairs in every correspondence. So if I'm corresponding with co-chair A, always include co-chair B, because you need to maintain that level of communication because they're technically both of your co-chairs. So I mean, from a sort of, again, going back to my veto player theory, from a veto player, you just increase the number of vetoes that can exist during your defense. That being said, if the co-chairs already have a previous relationship with themselves and with you, for me was not necessarily a impediment or a burden.
Yeah, those are great comments. I think the first question to ask is why co-chairs? And in some cases, it could be a requirement of the academic unit or the department. There are some cases, for example, when I was a young assistant professor, it was required that in order to, well, a first-year assistant professor was not allowed to chair a thesis, a dissertation. They could chair a thesis, not a dissertation, but they could co-chair. So there may be that particular requirement of the particular academic unit. So that's the first question. What was the rest of that, Neff? I kind of lost track here.
It was just, are there pros and cons to having a co-chair?
So as Dr. O said, it's another veto person, right? It's another person to satisfy. It's another ego to keep quiet, if you will. And you might find it strange, but faculty do have egos, and sometimes they get in the way of student progress, but that's another discussion. However, there are situations where co-chairs can actually strengthen your work, and that's probably why Raphael had co-chairs to start with. I've been on thesis at UNLV with co-chairs, and the reason for the co-chair was because the student had a particular project which I didn't have all the expertise of. So I brought in a co-chair who had some of the technical expertise, but not the academic content expertise. So it ended up being a great team for the student. And again, if the two faculty have mutual respect, they understand their boundaries, their limits, but their contributions, then it can be a very good situation.
Thank you so much. So as we near the end of our time today, do you all have some last suggestions to share with us for how students can best utilize their advisors and committee members?
I get tired of going first. I don't know. Maybe it's because on my screen I'm on the far left and the top. Okay, so keep in mind as students that all of your committee members have your success as the objective. They want to do everything they can do to support you and to add their expertise as appropriate to your product. They want you to succeed. They want you to represent the university well, and also their names are on your product, so they have a bit of pride there as well. Do not be afraid to approach your committee. There is no stupid question. If in fact it may be important, well, okay, let me rephrase this. You do have to have some respect for the time and the schedules and the other responsibilities that your faculty have. So it may be that you're working with individuals who require specific appointments a week in advance or whatever, but you'll figure that out. So take advantage of everything that faculty have to offer and appreciate the time and the expertise that they're affording you. But again, understand, I can't stress this enough. Everyone that's on your team wants you to win, right? They're there to support you and to do the best to produce the best product that they can and to support you professionally however you can. So communication, again, you've heard that theme over and over again, really the key.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate all of those things. We are invested in your success. And just like Dr. Dufek was saying, the key is to utilize your committee. Don't just wait until it's time for the defense. Utilize them, involve them throughout the entire process. Do it continually. Spread it out. Don't just do it all concentrated right before you need to defend. Keep that constant communication and involve them.
Paralleling what the previous two speakers said, when you choose the committee, right, and we talk about this throughout today's workshop, there needs to be a strategic reason why you're choosing these individuals. So for example, if you choose a member of your committee in your department that's a methodologist, right, make sure you utilize that person's expertise specifically in your methodology chapter, right? Don't simply treat them as a reader and overly concentrate on your chair. That being said, my mentor told me from the get-go, he told me from day one, he said there's a perfect dissertation and there's a finished dissertation. It is up to you which avenue do you want to choose, right? Basically, get the job done, graduate, and go out in the job market.
So we got one last question just submitted. It's quite often for my chair to get off topic or talk about unrelated topics when we have virtual discussions. While I'd enjoy to chat with him, we don't have that much time because he's so busy. How can I make the discussion more effective? I don't want to interrupt him, so our discussion is generally, it goes with his pace. In the end, we have no time left for the meeting and I am still somewhat confused.
I would suggest that you have a list of things and start the meeting with, I've got a list of 5 things or whatever, so that they're aware, and kind of refer to the list. All right, this is the second thing, this is the third. So they kind of mentally know how far along. And then if there's time at the end for, discussion like that, I think that would be fine.
That's excellent advice, Dr. Navalta. And then, if you're at the second of 3 things on the list or 4 things on the list and the conversation starts drifting, now it's time to utilize your communication skills and politely redirect to, I do have 2 more things if we have some time or something like that, and try to do it in kind of a light way so that the speaker is not offended. But I think what that'll do is exactly what Dr. Navalta said. It'll trip the faculty member's mind and say, Oh yeah, that's right. Let's get back on task.
Awesome. So we have reached the end of our time, so we'll wrap this up. But before we do, I'd like to give a great thank you to our panelists. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And thank you all for joining us for today's workshop. I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.